Welcome to Citizens for Community Media. Some of you might recognize, you will recognize that Pat Mangan is, he's blessed us to come back on. Just before we begin the show, I'm always here. In fact, this show is the plug public access television here locally. But I did go to a meeting. Pat, you knew about the meeting, but I went down to Indianapolis, and there were some citizens, some leaders, elected officials at this meeting, and I met a fella, a little bit younger than us, from Fort Wayne. Mm-hmm. And so I asked him, I said, "Oh, did you ever hear of Access Fort Wayne? You know, the public access." He said, "Oh yeah, I used to have, I had some shows on there." And I said, "Well, what do you think about Access Fort Wayne? Did you think it's influential in the community?" He goes, "Oh, it's really popular," he says. Mm-hmm. And he talked on. And then he said, like, if you walk into a barber shop, he said, there's a good chance they're going to be talking about some show that was on the local public access channel. He said it's that effective and people are that involved. And we're not there yet, of course, but if you have more involvement on the political scene, and of course we're also very interested on the spiritual scene, but mm-hmm. just involvement in any area in a way, it creates a healthier community. I mean, that's what we're seeing in Ann Arbor, we're seeing that in Fort Wayne, and we need more of it here. Absolutely, absolutely. And the reason you're back on the show is people like to get an update from you mm-hmm. on what's happening in, you could say politically, mm-hmm. In the local community, but also you're in touch with the national community because you're on two task forces, or how would you mm-hmm. say that? Two national task forces out of DC,
Washington,
out of Washington. So you do have contact mm-hmm. with the administration, and you're very aware that there's been a significant shift from a liberal administration to a conservative one. And that has created opportunities for a lot of people. And we're on this show to alert them to those opportunities and detail some specific areas that are kind of more opened up than they were before, for people, the local citizen to jump in and I mean, I don't want to be pushing one way or another on this show because but to push forward a more conservative agenda.
Well, you know, as president of Citizens for Community Values of Indiana, and the work we do at home in Indianapolis and in the Midwest region and in Washington D.C. With the national pro-family community and working with a couple of national organizations and a couple of national task forces, what has become very apparent is that the opportunity for, and I'm going to speak as a person of faith because I represent the pro-family movement as a person of faith, so from that perspective, the opportunity that we had before was to stand up for the truth while it was being assailed from all directions. And as a country, we were losing ground, and as a moral people, we were losing ground. But now, there are these great opportunities that exist for us to take ground back, to take the country back, and I think that as the culture war has progressed, maybe into a hot war when the nomination of a Supreme Court Justice Robert Bork was politicized in one of the worst ways we've ever seen, simply because he believed that abortion was wrong. Until now, and everything that's happened in between, there are great opportunities for us. And the one that really made the cold culture war a hot war was the Bork nomination. And so, you know, when you look at these things from abortion to rolling back its arms, to rolling back the harms of the porn sex industry and human trafficking, and from dealing with the problems of increased criminality and other moral issues that have come out of illegal immigration, as well as financial issues, and looking at corruption on a grand scale, both nationally and locally, these are opportunities where we can stand up and take ground back now that we sort of have a home field advantage, if you don't include the deep state, of course. So those are some of the places we have opportunities, and we should be watching for those opportunities to get involved and to make a difference. The purpose of this show being to cause citizen engagement in issues at every level and affecting the life that we share here in America, or share in our state, or share in our county, or share in our city. So these are the opportunities that are out there. And I just think, like, when you look at, for example, the issue of abortion, I've been engaged in that struggle for 40 years. I thought everybody would understand how barbaric abortion was. I was naive as a college student. I thought, well, we'll have this thing figured out in 4 or 5 years, and everybody sees what this is. The country will be repulsed, and being the good moral people they are, we'll put an end to abortion. Well, all these years later, now, for the first time, we're not only working at the opportunity to defund abortion, to defund Planned Parenthood, not only around the world, something Donald Trump did right away, and then looking at that in America, but we're looking at prosecuting Planned Parenthood. And, we saw this tremendous opportunity to get involved in an election, and the difference that election made was a fabulous Supreme Court justice, Neil Gorsuch, being added to the court. And now not only are we thinking defund Planned Parenthood, and are we thinking prosecute Planned Parenthood for selling baby parts. I mean, how gruesome can it get before we develop a conscience? And then we're also at the point where we're 1 or 2 Supreme Court appointments from having a court that would have a heart and mind to overturn Roe. We have 70 million dead babies. It's impossible to repent for that. The only thing we can do is throw ourselves in the mercy of God and beg for forgiveness and stop it. And so this is one of the issues, like, where, if somebody gets involved, how do you get involved? Work with Citizens for Community Values. Work with Right to Life. Work with your Congress people. Work with your state officials. Keep the pressure on, for a justice who's a strict constructionist for the next Supreme Court appointment. We have an opportunity with this administration. This administration did something no one has ever done, which is say, here's a finite list of people. I'm going to make all my appointments from this list. And this list has been vetted by the pro-family movement, the pro-life movement, and people are thrilled with that list. So just staying engaged. We have midterm elections coming up. Those elections are going to have the same kind of meaning that the presidential election had.
If we were talking about the difference of liberal to conservative,
yeah,
that I was thinking that list is a very good indicator. In other words, do you think under the prior administration, if you had seen their list of judges, do you think any one of them would have been on there?
No, none of these judges I don't think would be on their list, even though all these judges are not way out to the right. Like, when the liberal administrations come in, they have a left-wing set of justices, and we see that. They go way to the left. And conservative administrations tend to go to the middle, and then they get slam dunked and accidentally have, someone in there that should have been a little bit stronger and to the right. I mean, we look at the trouble that we've had with Justice Kennedy. He makes it a 4.5 to a 4.5 court, not really a 5 to 4. He's 5 to 4 with us on some things. He's 5 to 4 on critical moral issues on the other side. And so he got the seat that Judge Bork should have had.
Wow.
So you think about what one appointment different can make. If one of the liberal judges leaves the court next, and we get someone like Neil Gorsuch, who is an applauded jurist from both sides, it will have probably a lasting effect that will go 30 years plus in our nation. at those court decisions at the top. And it's very important that we get those people on the court who believe in construing the laws as the Constitution did, not as a living, breathing document that you go ahead and change the morality and change the foundation. We can't go around changing the foundation and expect to have the same country at the end. So this is not a document. If you want to amend it, you can amend it,
but
that's a difficult process, and it's meant to be difficult. But you can't just rewrite it and reinterpret it and pretend that you don't want it to say what it says, so you're going to rewrite it the way they did in Roe. And you can't have that kind of law without creating oligarchical, dictatorial power of the court then legislating from the bench.
Right.
So this kind of activism, we have to get into
check
it.
And balance.
Yeah, we can't have judges like we have seen in this first year of a new administration try to govern the foreign policy of America as we have seen them doing as activist judges have tried to set aside what the duly elected commander-in-chief has set in motion in terms of who can come to this country, who can't, where it is in the best interest of the country to have travel bans from different places. And these are clearly enumerated as the powers of the president. We have an activist court. The more that we fix this problem, we're going to have better judgments all the way around. But that's just one area of the court, and in the area of abortion, that we could see a transformation of society. Plus, this administration has appointed more federal judges in the first year than has seen in any of the last administrations, probably in the last 4 or 5. So we're already seeing a positive impact on that, but it will take an entire duration of this administration and maybe a repeat of this administration to actually clean up where we have all these activist judges, who are in place. So that's something that's an important opportunity. So what's the opportunity? The opportunity is stay involved. Don't check out because we got one great Supreme Court nominee, and if someone else comes up, there's other great ones on that list. Stay involved so that we can actually get that person, confirmed through the Senate.
But you mean stay involved? You're talking just on practical things, even writing a letter to your congressman.
Yeah, I'm saying on all these issues, number one, become informed. Number two, communicate with your local, state, and federal representatives. And number three, suit up and vote, and tell people what you're voting for and why. You're not required. You can keep it secret if you want to, but I think we have a call in the scriptures that says, "Don't put your light under a bushel basket." We want to let your light shine. So I think you got to engage these things, and sometimes it feels uncomfortable to engage politics. Well, the whole world is about politics. The more rambunctious the politics are, the more peaceful transitions of power are, and this is counterintuitive. A lot of people think, well, if we just suppress everybody's strong speech, well, then we'll keep things peaceful. Exactly the opposite is true. No. If you oppress people and tell them you can't talk about these issues, then they resort to violence because they have no other way of expression. And that's what happened in this election. Was America said, stop trying to be so politically correct that you're not letting anybody say what they need to say. Let them get it off their chest. Let them say what's on their mind, and let them say it the way we do around our tables. And I think that's why so many people embrace this populist conservative president, and why there's such an opportunity here for all conservatives, all libertarians, really for everybody, to have an opportunity to move forward. But these issues, like we look at where we have come from with the porn sex industry, the massive problem that we have seen in American streets, and human trafficking. There was a study by the University of Pennsylvania that pointed out that over 300,000 young people under the age of 18 were being taken into the porn sex industry every year in just 17 major U.S. cities.
That's not including elsewhere? That's just 17.
That's just 17. That's just 17 major U.S. cities. And everybody would know about this, except when they released this study, it was September 10th, 2001. And just as it released and just as it was about to hit the airwaves and go through the media cycles and have this promoted, 9/11 hit. And so it got deep-sixed. I mean, look, if I said Mexico invaded and took over 300,000 of our young people captive and we're using them as sex slaves, we'd say, mobilize the Air Force, send out the Marines. And when this study came out and told us that, nothing happened because it got deep-sixed, and we're still having to pull it out in front of people today. But now we have the opportunity to take a major bite out of trafficking, particularly that is related to drugs and it's related to the criminal enterprises. And we see this administration is ready to not play identity politics, but to go after these groups of thugs that were here from Guatemala, and these groups of thugs that come across, the border. So you have people who are ready to address this. Plus, we now know all the harms associated with the porn sex industry, that people who get addicted to pornography addiction leads to sexual addiction. Sexual addiction leads to criminal sexual behavior and sexual exploitation and to human trafficking. So we can come together and do things as a country that's going to stop that. One of the things that feeds that kind of human trafficking is a broken immigration system where we can't control who's coming and going, and we can't put a big enough magnifying glass on what's happening there. And so now that we have a conservative populist administration, this is the time when we need to engage Congress and we need to engage the Justice Department. In the past, I've had the opportunity to work with cooperatively with the Justice Department Obscenity Task Force and have been close to its leaders. And we have spearheaded actions in local communities. We actually have stopped or closed over 35 adult businesses right here in the region in Indiana and Michigan and Illinois. And when you look at that, right here in St. Joe County, when we started, we had 30 adult businesses. We closed a majority of those. We're down to 4. Toledo, similar sized community, at the same time had 30. They now have 55. Imagine if at every toll road exit here, there was a dozen, adult businesses. We stopped them right next to the Four Winds Casino in New Buffalo. We stopped them in St. Joseph, Michigan. We stopped them in Chickaming. We stopped them in Three Oaks. We stopped them in Michigan City and LaPorte, in South Bend,
but basically
all around it.
You're saying they did not have an organization called Citizens, or like it, Citizens for Community Values. Mm-hmm. Had they could have stopped it.
Yeah, and what we have stopped this many going across. So, and Toledo did not have that kind of an organization. So, the mixture is citizens and business leaders and faith leaders. And when you put that coalition together, which is the coalition that Citizens for Community Values has not only in Indiana, but sister organizations have in other parts of the country, all the way out in Long Island and in Ohio, the original largest of the Citizens for Community Values state organizations. These organizations bring citizens together and empower them. And business leaders and faith leaders form a unique coalition, because faith leaders don't like to get involved in legislation and public policy that impacts businesses unless business leaders are there. And business leaders don't like to touch moral issues unless pastors are there to affirm the moral side. Mm-hmm. So when you put them all together, I have watched many great leaders, citizens, become great business and faith leaders and community leaders because they came together. And when they come together to address these issues, yes, there's passion, but there's also logic and a plan. So we passed dozens of pieces of legislation that addresses the harms of the adult entertainment industry, the porn sex industry. And now we have an administration that's ready to go after things. So we want to take that to the next level. And we have many opportunities to do that. So we need organizations like American Family Association, who is a colleague organization we work with in Indiana and Michigan and many states. You know, Don's son Tim is running that now, and it has a great grassroots. Many of our friends are involved in that.
When we were at Notre Dame, I don't know if you remember, but Don Wildman came and spoke at La Fortune. He was up there on the top floor. And there was a bunch of us sitting around. I don't know if you were with us, but that was a long time ago.
Don Wildman has done a fabulous work. So part of this work that I do in Washington is with organizations like that, like Tony Perkins, you know, with the Family Research Council. In Indiana, we work with Micah Clark of the Indiana Family Association, and we work with Kurt Smith from the Indiana Family Institute. And so there are many of these organizations that people can engage with, and you certainly engage with Citizens for Community Values of Indiana. And as we do, then we have an opportunity to stop adult businesses from coming based on the secondary harmful negative effects caused by them that the Supreme Court has entirely validated local communities fighting. So as late as just a few years ago, we stopped one adult business outside of Michigan City, and then out in LaPorte County, and then on the other side. And what happens is these predatory businesses will come in and steamroll local attorneys unless there's somebody standing up to fight. So when you have citizens who are organized and ready to fight, you can really make a difference. And that's how we've been able to change the flow of instead of this spreading, instead of South Michigan Street in South Bend looking like the underside of Detroit, it is now available fully for redevelopment. And in the years that we started, we closed so many clubs down there and went through really more than a culture war with, windows being shot out. But it was citizens and faith leaders and business leaders who stood up and who at the beginning had some of the support of the journalists when we had objective journalism, and also concerned elected officials. If you want elected officials to move, and you have business leaders and faith leaders who are able to move the base of support that empowers them, you can help elected officials, public servants, to find their conscience and to find a stiffer back to stand up. And that's what engagement brings if we engage, on these issues. And, we look at, like, for example, what's happened in the LGBT movement and the sexual confusion that's coming from that. I had two campus ministries, one at Notre Dame and one at Vanderbilt University. And I've been dealing with this issue for 40 years. I've been leading people out of sexual confusion into sexual wholeness, leading them out of homosexuality, which is a lifestyle choice. No one is born that way. There is no scientific proof anyone is born that way. And the principal person, who promoted the notion that homosexuality should be taken out of the DSM with the American Psychological Association, actually was the one who did the study around 2004-05.
That was back in 1973. I'm just going to
that's when he did.
But I was majoring in psychology at Notre Dame at that time, and then I switched my senior year to German. But that's when they came out with it, and I can't be honest. Honestly, I'm not aware of if I understood the position. Actually, but I was always under the impression that it was a mental illness. Okay?
Well, it still remains in the DSM as a for unwanted same-sex attraction, and so that particular person who made a political move, who was in charge of the American Psychological Association, later in life encountered so many people who no longer had same-sex attraction and who were no longer practicing homosexualism, and who were happy and doing fine, that he took it upon himself to do a scientific study. He did a serious review of all the scientific literature in the world at that time about the so-called gay gene, or what's called the biologic theory. And he came out with a study, and it was peer-reviewed, and it was published in journals. And he said, I'm not saying we won't find a gay gene, but I'm saying that right now there is zero evidence for the biologic theory. Now, by then, a big part of the culture was absolutely declaring there was. It was proven. And the fact is there's no proof. In fact, all the studies stack up against anybody being born that way, including the very famous study on twins who have
I remember that study.
Who have the exact same genetic makeup, and almost no correlation
like a 20,
between
30-year study. It was a long study.
It was a long-term study. So when we look at these things, there are opportunities for us to address them if we come together and work at them. So what's the opportunity? Well, the opportunity is that transgenderism is being pushed by the LGBT movement as kind of like the next big thing. And we see Hollywood embracing it, and we saw the misguided attempt by the Obama administration to force girls and boys into the same bathrooms through this. And thankfully, President Trump nixed that right out of the chute, and we got that reversed. But these are the places you have to engage with your school board then. You have to engage with your legislators at the state level and at the city and county level and tell them we don't want, boys in the girls' room. And I remember one very fired up dad said, I don't care what your son thinks he is. I don't want him in the restroom with my daughter.
Well, of course he'd say that.
And this is like common sense, but it's become one of the issues that, like in this administration, we've said no to doing transgender reassignment surgery in the military. We're reversing all of that. Why? Well, Johns Hopkins are the ones who actually perfected the sex change operation. They stopped doing it 30 years ago because they found 9 years out that people who had the surgery as a treatment for gender dysphoria were like 20 times more likely to commit suicide. And I know anecdotally from people I have ministered to and worked with that there are people who get their psyche about their sexual psyche confused because of all the mess of information that's out there today, and they end up having a sex reassignment surgery done, and then they realize, wait, I'm still a man. Now I want that back. Now I want to reverse. And people end up mutilating themselves, and then they are desperate. The desperation and the tendency towards suicide is not because somebody has misunderstood them. It's because the actions they've taken is a sin against themselves. And so, the compassionate thing is to say no to these things. When Facebook was accepting over 50 versions of sexual orientation, there's only two sexual orientations, male and female. When you get past that, you're getting into something that modern psychology has made up. This is a made-up movement. And when Facebook finally gave up the ghost and said, well, you can have 57, said, you know what, that's not even enough. You know what, you can just make up your own. So, that's all well and good for the fantasyland world, of liberalism. But then how do you expect school boards and county councils and city councils and state legislatures and even Congress, for that matter, to come up with public policies that match that kind of nonsensical view of the world? I mean, you have a right to believe whatever you want to, but you don't have a right to impose that on the rest of us. So this is an opportunity we have to stop the encroachment of the LGBT agenda on our freedoms and, frankly, on sane public policy in the schools, in the workplace, anywhere.
But the percentage of people that are lesbian or gay is still pretty low. But
according to the CDC, it's 1.8%.
Right, but as Joe Biden brought out, is that people have been watching shows like Will and Grace, and so people have been changing their minds as whether they're against it.
Sure.
See,
well,
so that's part of that's a big problem too. Is that we're dealing with a populace that's being influenced by the popular media.
Sure it is. Sure it is. I mean, the whole idea is The ludicrousness of this is that this is like the clay looking back at God with its fist in God's face saying, you're not going to tell me what I am. I'm going to tell you what I am. And the problem that we have today is that we're not getting good reporting about the outcomes. Like if you're a homosexual man in America, you die 8 to 20 years early because of the sheer dangerousness of the sexual acts that you participate in are so deadly because of the diseases that come with them that you're like rolling back the mortality rate to 1847. So who's the more compassionate? The one who says, you shouldn't do that. Let me help you out of that. Let me bring you to Jesus and let you get transformed. Let me go back and unpack with you, where your psychosexual identity got mixed up. And by the way, in the people I've been ministering to for 40 years, and I'm not saying this is a national statistic, I'm just saying this is my experience. 75% of the people who came to me with unwanted same-sex attraction were same-sex molested. Whether it was a teacher, whether it was a clergyman, whether it was a relative, whether it was a neighbor, whether it was a coach, whether it was just somebody who got access to them, most of the people who come into this and grasp it as an identity, right, have gotten there in large part through some form of sexual abuse. And we know that, too strong a same-sex parent, too strong an opposite-sex parent can interrupt the psychosocial development of individuals and can give them confusion. But we also know that while 25% of young people between the ages of 13 and 21 think they might be gay because of their discomfort with the opposite sex, 97% of that 25%, with no intervention whatsoever,
work it through
by 21, and they never self-identify as being same-sex attracted again. So here's what we know, is that if you push this and you push people into it, people end up with AIDS. People end up with various sexually transmitted diseases related specifically to the type of sexual activity in dangerous multiple persons. And the will and grace notion is illusory. Now, everybody might know somebody who has been together for a long time, and they point to the exception and say, let's make that the rule. And I say, no, let's look at the rule. Most of the people who are in this are experiencing all kinds of self-doubts, all kinds of dark and dangerous experiences. They have a high correlation with drug abuse. They have a high correlation with alcohol abuse. They have a high correlation with suicide. They have a high correlation, by the way, with domestic abuse. Domestic violence, the only real documented course of violence against homosexualism that is there is by other homosexuals. It is the highest subset of domestic violence of any subset of so-called couples, anywhere on the American landscape. So, what we do as a people is we have watched the liberal administration demonize anybody who disagrees, anybody who opposes, no matter how lovingly you oppose, you're a bigot, you're a hater. This is right out of Saul Alinsky's playbook. It is the idea that you demonize everybody who disagrees with you so you can't have a discussion. I've never tried to stop the other side from saying what they say. I think what they're saying is wrong. Sometimes I think it's a lie. Most of the time I think it's misguided. But I'm happy to have them say their piece, but then they've got to listen to me say my piece that reflects, as best I can as a man of God, what my King Jesus had to say in the Scriptures, which is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and which was the foundation of Western civilization. In Western civilization, the foundation of this nation. And so, I think I've got a right to stand and to proclaim that anywhere. And I love everybody. I even love the people who hate me. But, we have to come to terms with this. And then we have things like, we have the whole illegal immigration question. My friends who are from many different persuasions, and I have friends from all different backgrounds, persuasions, all different races. When their parents came here in the 1800s, in the early 1900s, most of them were required not to as children not to speak their native language. And the reason
or the pressure was such that they chose not to.
The reason was that they wanted them to be able to contribute to America. They wanted to come to America and add to it. They wanted to be a part of something that was better than where they were coming from, and they wanted to be able to contribute to it, and they wanted to be successful in it. So that type of immigration, whether it was from the potato famine and the harshness of British rule over my ancestors from Ireland, or whether it was the world wars or the plague or the other things that happened in Europe that sent so many different European immigrants into America, is very different than an immigration that wants to sneak in. Mm-hmm. You don't ever sneak into anything to bless it. You sneak in to steal. So positive immigration is when you come here, you want to become American, you want to be part of America, you want to add to it. But when you come here with all the problems from your past place of residence, and you want to recreate an enclave of that here, that is not healthy for America. And America has no obligation to open its doors to them. And the confusion of, the poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty, which was a poetic expression. It's not what our Constitution says. People who are not Americans do not have the same constitutional rights. There are certain inalienable rights that people should have anywhere. We believe that. We'll defend that. But we don't extend to the citizens of the world the rights of a citizen of the United States.
Now, one thing I noticed with the Trump administration, they're trying to go back to like maybe how Canada does it. It's a merit-based.
Yes.
But just thinking about my grandfather, my great-grandfather,
mm-hmm.
we have the big plaque up in Wisconsin. Hans Olof Helland,
mm-hmm.
Coming from Norway, maybe about 1874, 1887 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But he had to stay in the country several years. Plus, he had to, what they were looking for, he had to have 4 witnesses that he was of a moral, upright character.
Yes.
But now we're saying merit, but back then, it shows you our Christian heritage. He was not going to be certified as a citizen until he had lived here and proven himself to be moral and upright.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't directly merit-based, but it was moral-based.
Well,
that's what I'm thinking.
The merit was
based on the moral.
The merit was in part based on morality, in part based on what do you bring to offer. So this is another opportunity. We have an opportunity to leave the identity politics that has been so divisive, that has failed, that has divided America, that has divided the races. The Obama politics, the Obama identity politics, pitting the poor against the wealthy, pitting, blacks against whites, and pitting everybody against one another. That is what was rejected in the last election, and we have the opportunity to change the immigration system, the broken immigration system that's flooding illegals into this country, that's destroying America. And we've watched what it did when Germany opened up and brought 1 million in, mm-hmm. how it is destroying Germany, how it's destroying Sweden, how it's destroying these other countries where they opened up and didn't filter, and so now they have a problem. We're going to have the same problem. Illegal immigrants in this country commit crimes at 5 times the rate of the average American. It is not good for this country. Ronald Reagan said, a country with no borders is no country at all. We have to have borders. We have to have those police. We don't want people coming here to steal. If you're sneaking in to get our freebies, you're stealing. And we do have some allowance for this, for asylum, and there's a very sophisticated set of reasons you can get in. But it isn't just because I don't like where I live. We've seen this debate take on emotional torments that are crazy, and how disrespectful the previous president of Mexico was when he's got a border across his southern border to keep out all the Guatemalans.
I mean, he's got a wall.
He's got a wall. He's got a wall on his border to keep out the Guatemalans. But, God forbid we should have a wall that secures ours, since we have now the problems of Mexico, the corruption.
It's really
the
bad.
drug cartels.
It's really
you
bad
know,
down there now.
I've been down on the border. You've been on the border. I've been in Mexico. I've been in there as a missionary, and I've been through southern Texas in there. And the problems that are down there for the people who live there are horrendous. We now have an opportunity to go to a merit-based immigration system, settle this DACA thing, put an end to chain migration, put an end. But this is the thing. None of these things will happen unless the people and communities across America, across Indiana, speak to their congressional representatives and demand that this happens, and speak back to, through the elections and the midterm elections, the presidential election, and say, this is the policy we want. We don't want illegal immigration. We don't want people sneaking in. We're not going to tolerate that. And we are still the most generous people in the world. And we help people in countries all over the world. The foreign aid budget is huge. We don't have an obligation to make everybody in the world a citizen of the United States.
What would be an ideal community? I mean, if you lived in a perfect world and you could create, everybody in the town was your child, so to speak, and you could, the ideal community doing what could potentially be done. They're all on the same page. I mean, this is unrealistic, but they could achieve a lot, right? Just a local community.
I think a community, like I've asked this question, what would our community look like if we were in covenant with God? And I'm not talking about God as a higher being. I'm not talking about God as whatever you want to name him. I'm talking about the great I am. I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian God. I'm talking about God the Father, Jesus the Son, the Savior, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and the Holy Spirit. I'm talking about the triune Judeo-Christian God, the only God that exists. What would our churches look like if we were in covenant with God? What would our local governments look like if we were in covenant with God? What would our schools look like? What would our neighborhoods look like if we were in covenant with God? And that brings us to that sort of fifth area, which is this idea of scandal and corruption and weighted scales. The scripture says God hates a weighted scale. That's when somebody has the fix-in. We saw on the Democratic side of the federal election for president, on the national election, that a lot of young people who were supportive of Bernie were shocked to find that the fix was in. He was never going to have a chance to get that nomination. We then saw this massive, probably one of the worst miscarriages and abuses of power in our history, to throw all of this phony, the Russians made me do it, the Russians and Trump. The only evidence is now coming out that it was Hillary who was aligned with the Russians. It was the Steele dossier that was actually facilitated by Russians who pushed that through to Steele, who pushed that through to the media, who pushed that through to our own Department of Justice and FBI, who pushed that through a FISA court into the worst abuse of power we have seen ever. That our Department of Justice and our department and our intelligence services were actually weaponized in a political campaign by a sitting president and someone from his administration who's running for president, by President Obama, with Hillary Clinton running for president against Donald Trump. And this is going to have to be rectified. This whole year has been about the false narrative of the Russians. No, the Russians were involved, but they're involved through Hillary with uranium one in a deal that took a key slice of our uranium supply and put it in the hands of Russia. And it was the Democrats who did that. It was Obama who did that. It was Hillary who did that. We have seen now with Strzok and even with Comey the conflicts that are there in a country. We've seen our institutions fall. We've watched our institutions falling one after the other. The family's under attack. We have more than 50% divorce. Now we're seeing, our justice system collapsing because of wickedness at the top, where the fix is in. Now, most of the people who are in law enforcement, most of the people who are in the FBI, most of the people who are involved in the Justice Department, I know some of them, fine people. They're dedicated. They risk their lives to keep us safe, to accomplish justice. But this corrupt cabal at the top, that has got to be cleaned up. We even see, in our local community, we've had a controversy here for several years, just since our latest mayor was a new mayor, over the firing of an African-American police chief and a series of tapes that have now resurfaced and are front and center, and which, by the way, the South Bend City Council is doing the right thing. They want to have those tapes revealed so that everybody can understand what's on those tapes. There's all kinds of allegations, and there's been lawsuits about them, and so many people have worked so hard to cover up those tapes. It puts you directly in mind of the 60,000 missing Hillary emails, or it puts you in mind of the 50,000 texts missing, from Strzok and his lover at the FBI, who hated Trump and wanted to have an insurance policy to keep him from being president, if he was president, to keep him from being able to function. Well, we've got this situation where there's been all these lawsuits and national, local, regional players, and right now, I support the South Bend, Common Council's attempts to bring these to light, because we need to see we need to hear what's in these tapes, and it needs to be put to rest. There's a cloud over Mayor Pete. There's a cloud over this city. There is a cloud that's in part racially charged and in part corruption charged, and there's a question about it, and that question is not going to be solved until those tapes are aired, and until the citizens and all the politics and all the political leaders and all the journalists can dig through that and say, here's what happened, and here's what the controversy was about, and here's what was done wrong. Now let's set that right. Let's not do that again. And these are the kinds of things that only happen when the citizens are engaged and awake, and when they engage the government. A lot of people have asked, how did you come to know the vice president, and how did you get involved in this, and how did you come to know several people who were running for president the last time? 30 years ago, when I was pastoring a small church, I got just a deep heart conviction, Pete, an inner city church, and I just got this conviction that I loved America. I saw some of the problems we were experiencing. I thought, we've got to pray for our nation. We've got to, and specifically, I thought, we've got to pray for all three branches of government, the judicial branch, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and we've got to pray for these at all three levels of government, the local, the state, and the federal. And so for 7 years, every Sunday morning at 7 a.m., we dragged ourselves out of bed and went to pray. And we didn't have anything in mind other than we just wanted to honor God. We wanted to see our community thrive. We wanted to see our nation thrive with the blessings of God. And we prayed earnestly about the local judges and the local mayors, the local legislative bodies, the councils. We prayed about the Indiana House of Representatives and Indiana Senate, and about the governor, and about the Indiana courts. And we prayed about the president, and we prayed for the Congress, and we prayed for the whole federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court. And through time, that prayer led us to understand how it all worked and fit together and how it came together. And it began to cause us to get people to run for offices, and then support people, and then learn the issues, and then speak on the issues, and articulate a value system that translated to public policy as nearly as we could from the scriptures. And so that's what comes out of engagement. I think that's one of the challenges that we have right now is, every 4 years, a lot of good, decent people wake up and engage for a presidential election. Then they go back to their lives. We can't afford that anymore. And we're fortunate that right now, we're in a place where, we could really make a difference if we engage right now. And I think, there's a whole plethora of issues we haven't talked about at all, but these issues are central and core. They get to the heart of religious liberty. They get to the heart of the fact that our nation was founded with an eye towards pleasing God and an eye towards achieving His blessing. And it was very present in George Washington saying it's impossible for us to think that we can carry on this kind of prosperity without God's blessing on us. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's been with us from the founding. But there have always been people who wanted to secularize this, who wanted to take it away from being a Judeo-Christian foundation. They wanted to take it somewhere else. And the Constitution affords them the right to argue their case. But it doesn't give them or anybody else the right to silence those of us who want to continue what we began as and who want to continue the Judeo-Christian tradition. You know, a lot of people criticize this country and say, and they go back to slavery. And what I would say is what Dinesh D'Souza says. Slavery was universal. It started in Africa. It went through all the continents. It was used everywhere.
At the time of Christ, half the people were slaves, basically.
But America, you know, England, you know, with Wilberforce, put an end to the slave trade.
Slave trade, that's
the slave trade. But in America, we ended slavery. We put an end to slavery here. So America, if you are an American, you grew up here, or if you're a naturalized American and you came here legally and went through the process, you can be proud to be an American. You can be proud of the founders. You can be proud of our history because we didn't have it right at the beginning, but we figured it out. We paid a dear price, and we fixed it. We got rid of slavery. Now, we're still working through, you know, all the issues of how we deal with the plurality. And that's what a representative republic is about. That's what a constitutional republic is about. We have to have the ability to engage. But if the citizens don't engage, then how are we going to achieve what the founders did when they gave us something that's still living today, all these years later? And that's why I feel like, you know, people say, well, you know, I was involved in the election. You know, I debated with everybody. I got on Facebook and debated, and I tweeted, and I voted, and I passed out literature, and I did all these things. But now I just want to go back to my life.
Edmund Burke say all it takes for evil to dominate is for good men to do nothing. And yeah. I was also thinking, you know, many times St. Paul said, be careful to give yourself to good works. And some people think doing good works in these areas you were talking about really isn't for Christians. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean some of these, it says give yourself, be careful, obviously. Be careful. Don't be thinking you're giving yourself to a good work and it's not really a godly work. But a lot of these things, Christians can directly get in.
I don't see how you can be a Christian in a constitutional republic that's of, by, and for the people, and not be called, not be commanded by Christ to engage in the decision-making process that, number one, chooses the leaders, and number two, chooses the policies. In other words, you know, I got invited to speak to a group of pastors before an election a few years back, and I said, you know, it would really help if you all would not tell the body of Christ that the only people qualified to be public servants are pagans. And they all sort of did the RCA dog look. They turned their head, looked at me. And I said, you know, when you say things like, we don't do religion and politics here, that's stiffened a lot of backs. I said, you know, when you say politics is dirty, you know, when you say Christians shouldn't be involved in politics, and no, that's exactly wrong. It's exactly upside down. You belong, the same people who are the church are the government. You can't get away from that in a constitutional republic. Look, for thousands of years, a war, a right of succession is who determined the leaders. Now, in a constitutional republic, we determine the leaders. We have the awesome responsibility before God to select leaders, to go through that process. So we should do that passionately and bring that together, but we have to engage.
Right.
We have to engage. Otherwise, how can we be salt and light if we don't engage?
And this is this show is Citizens for Community Media, and what I'm doing with this show is trying to get people to get a show, okay? Contact your local representatives, because they're the ones that support this, and without them supporting it, it will not continue to exist. But when you have shows like this, you can shed the light, and darkness has to flee. But this is Pat Mangan, and we're at the close. So till next time on Citizens for Community Media.